As you saw, I presented you with a couple of relatively famous quotations about the relationship between artists and the general society. Both quite modernist statements. The Ezra Pound quote, artists are the antenna of the race, I think is a very good description of the role that artists can and should play it's certainly a modernist idea. One of the important things to understand, I think, is that artists have played different roles in different cultures historically. What Leonardo thought he was doing was rather different from what Rodin thought he was doing, and that was quite different from what Andy Warhol thought he was doing. So the notion of what art is and the place it takes in culture is a moving target, and it's a historical mistake to imagine that the way that an artist is in 2010 is the way that an artist was in 1500. So I want to introduce that vein of historical relativity. Now, Marshall McLuhan, who presumably, go away, who presumably you're all familiar with, one of the great media theorists of the 20th century, also said similar things to what Pound was saying a few years earlier, that artists detect significant issues in their cultures. I can attest to this because I've been working in media art and the relationship between computing and the arts for longer than you've been alive. And one of the interesting things that I've noticed is that the work that was done in research in media arts, in particular I'm thinking of the period from the late 80s through to about 2004, many of the projects which are realized by media artists during that period have become component parts of the social media you now use. You're unaware that the research was done in the art world, by and large. But indeed, substantial amount of the both formal and technical research, which has become components of what you use every day as part of your digital culture, was actually developed amongst artists, not funded, generally not trained. And that's an interesting reflection in itself, because we're taught, particularly in what we call a technologically essentialist kind of philosophy, that engineers come up with technologies and then we get to play with them. Sorry to say, but that's probably completely upside down. Most of the technologies that we use have been developed in the world of amateurs, including the things that we regard as property of the discipline of engineering. That's a long conversation. We could have an entire quarter on that. But suffice to say, I'll give you an example. For instance, in the early 1970s, an artist by the name of Myron Kruger was working with analysis of real-time camera images for embodied interaction. In the mid to late 80s, a Canadian artist by the name of David Rokeby was working with real-time analysis of video images for cultural interaction. Through the 90s, I and several other colleagues were building real-time machine vision systems for cultural practices. Now, there's nothing in the Wii or the Kinect which wasn't developed, prototyped, and exhibited in the media art world before the mid-90s, I would say. So that's one example of a book full of examples that you could go to to indicate that somehow, and it's a bit mysterious why this happens, but to indicate that artists do important research. And one of the important things that artists are allowed to do, having thought about this for many years, this is what I've come to, is that people who work in research within disciplines already have their frame of view restricted by the nature of the discipline. So if you're doing research in chemical engineering, you know that you're not doing research in nutrition or sustainability or global warming. You're doing research in, you know. Artists are one of the few groups of people on the planet at this point in time who are permitted the freedom to integrate different dimensions of the human experience in ways that juxtapose them in new ways and often bring up surprising, sometimes disturbing sorts of results. So this is a conversation about interdisciplinarity. Artists are interdisciplinarians by default. And in our world of increasingly specialized disciplinary practice, it's an easy argument to make to say that what's new, what's possible, what's different lies outside of the disciplines, at the intersections of the disciplines, at a point when you play one discipline off against another, right? And that's what artists do. And for that reason, artists are commonly misunderstood, right? And it's true. A lot of what artists do is, in some way or another, junk. I want to talk to you about a range of different projects. I hope particularly you have taken a look at the project Terminal Air. It's an extremely important project, which I don't think we have time to work through now, but I encourage you to take it as a case study because it's very, very provocative. Terminal Air is a project which is a collaboration between Trevor Paglen, who's a geographer, investigative journalist, and self-proclaimed artist, and a group of political activist artists called the Institute for Applied Autonomy. And what they were concerned with in this project is the problem of extraordinary rendition. Is there anyone in this room who doesn't know what extraordinary rendition is? Good. So extraordinary rendition was the federal program of kidnapping people in different countries and moving them to secret jails, generally for interrogation, if not torture, and semi-permanent incarceration. This is, of course, contrary to all international law, but it's one of the things that the United States has been doing now since the mid-90s. And it's all a bit of a concern because it's contrary to the American Constitution, it's contrary to international law, and yet it's a component of the practice of the United States, which we all effectively pay for through our taxes. So what Institute for Applied Autonomy and Trevor Paglen attempted to do, and in fact successfully did in a very clever way, was to determine where the black sites were and which flights were transporting kidnapped people. And they did this in a very interesting way. Without breaking any laws, they took all the publicly available data on air flights, civilian air flights, landing and taking off at different airports, and by a fairly massive process of data sorting, determined the flights which were not commercial flights which were not available for passengers to buy tickets on. Right? And as a result, narrowed down from the entire global record of civilian air flights, a collection of flights which were flying from somewhat suspicious locations to other suspicious locations that were not carrying passengers. And as a result, revealed the names of the mostly private airlines which were moving these kidnapped people to the black sites. And having done so, Trevor Paglen went to some of these sites and photographed them. Fairly brave, fairly courageous to be flying to Afghanistan and finding what's regarded as a top secret military installation, photographing it and revealing the information publicly. Yeah, I think he has to be congratulated. Now, I want you to think about whether and in what way that is art practice. And many of the projects that I show you today, you're going to ask the same sort of questions about. The first project I want to show you is a piece of work by Michael Joachim Gray called the Umwelt Belt. And I think we can watch this, play. That little ticking noise is the soundtrack. So what are we looking at? It's a question. It's not rhetorical. What are we looking at? Tell me what you see.
A printer.
Say again. What now? A little louder, a little clearer.
Alarm clock.
An alarm clock. You see an alarm clock. All right. Junk. Okay, and where is it? What's the location? That's kind of nowhere, right? Could be out in space. What kind of pattern are these bits of junk inscribing in space? They're kind of in orbit, right? What else can you say about what's happening? What are the other formal qualities that we can see here about what's going on? Give me 3 formal qualities. You computer graphics people know this already, right? Woohoo. Okay. How many light sources are there? Dudes, this is an art class. This is called formal analysis. It looks like 1 light source, exactly. Well done. How much color is present in this scene? Yeah, pretty much 1, right? And there's one other thing that's curious about these objects. When they run into each other, what's happening? They go through each other. So how many people have done 3D animation in this room? 1. So what happens when 2 digital objects pass through each other? Okay? It's a bad thing, right? It's an error. Yeah. There ought to be something going on called obstacle avoidance. There ought to be a physics of collisions. These things should be bouncing off each other. They're not. They're just sliding through each other. So we've got a bunch of immaterial junk circling around nothing, breaking the laws of physics. Well, of course, the laws of physics in computer graphics are completely constructive, right? So one of the things that this artist is doing is breaking rules. He's doing the things that you're not supposed to do in computer graphics. It's almost as if he's intentionally doing something really stupid. It's got the simplest possible physics, the simplest possible lighting. And yet, I don't know about you, but for me, I find this to be a remarkably disquieting thing to watch. So that's an important thing. And one of the interesting things about this piece of work as a piece of 3D computer graphics is it doesn't look like Toy Story or whatever the, current Hollywood blockbuster 3D animation is, right? It's thrown all that away, right? It doesn't have realistic hair. It doesn't have reflections of teary eyeballs, right? It's just said that's all garbage, right? But having got rid of that garbage, it's left with garbage. So what is this garbage? Is this the detritus of the data sphere? Is this the landfill of the cloud? That's kind of the way I read it. It's like we've now created this vast environment of digital data flowing around the planet, sucking energy and resources at a prodigious rate. To do what? To fill it with crap like that. Now, I'm guessing now, and you might be able to advise me on this, but I think that, in fact, all of those models we were just looking at have been borrowed off the internet from Google SketchUp libraries or something, right? So he didn't even make that shit. He just swept it up.
You guys are allowed to laugh when people have jokes. We had this problem last week too.
All right. So, just look at that. There's a cassette, there's a watch, there's somebody's model of a hot glue gun. Some of them are well modeled, some of them are terribly modeled, some of them are large scale, some of them are small scale. There's a Macintosh power supply. No, it's a joystick. It's like utter garbage. Right? Okay. Wow. Let's
Oh, don't do that. Go back.
go back. Thank you very much. Right. I want to turn now to work in computer graphics of a different sort. And this is the work of a Vietnamese artist I've recently come across by the name of Dinh Q. Lê. And I couldn't find a complete collection of this particular series of works. So I've got to show you, these are stills from a digital animation, but I think as stills, they're pretty staggering. I'm going to go through a few of them now. So again, what can you tell me about that image? Let's talk formally for a moment. What do you see? Not a crashing helicopter, obviously, right? But what is it? What can you say about that image? What kind of an image is it?
Simon's group should answer his questions, if nobody else. Just throw something out there.
Helicopters crashing?
Well, they are helicopters crashing, it's true. Are they real helicopters? Okay. Okay. It's a kind of a perfect, idyllic digital world of crashing helicopters. There's no blood, there's no dying people. There are just these kind of platonic ideals of helicopters crashing into a perfect tropical sea under a perfect tropical sky with perfect little splashes. It's raining dead helicopters somewhere. So how does it make you feel, an image like that? Is it funny? Is it sad? Is it...
Different.
That's what now?
Indifferent.
It makes you feel indifferent.
Because it's not real.
I see. What if it was real?
It would be horrifying.
Right. Nicely put. Nicely put. But then again, when we go to the movies and we see the special effects, they're all digital special effects. Are we indifferent to those too? That's a matter of personality, I think. No, it's interesting, isn't it? So there's something about these images which I find quite disquieting again, and it's that somehow the life has been stripped out of them. They're sort of perfect objects in a perfect world. And of course, that's the world of computer graphics. No dirt. No. If you want dirt, you've got to actually make it. It's not like the real world. So it's interesting that this artist was actually born during the Vietnam War. He's a Vietnamese guy, obviously. Hello.
Go forward one.
Ah, sorry. One step forward, one step back. I thought it'd be nice to play a little interview of Dinley, because he seems like a pretty interesting guy.
My name is Dinh Q. Le. I'm a visual artist, a co-founder and co-director of Sand Art Gallery based in Ho Chi Minh City. I have lived a very complicated life. My art for me is a way to make sense of it all and to give some meanings to it.
For the generation of Vietnamese artists born in the United States after a war or that were brought there when little, Vietnam remains an enigma, notably through the depiction done by Hollywood in the war movies. Dinh Q. Le has grappled with this fragment of histories and has woven them literally and metaphorically into complex and multi-layered collages that weave memory, tradition, and history in really complex visual images.
My work is about peeling back and expose the multiple layers of reality. I'm interested in how meanings are constructed. I'm also interested in what do you do with the burden of the history you inherited. Do you let it dictate who you are, or you take control of it and turn it into what you needed? The revamping of the educational system in Vietnam is sorely needed, where memorization, conformity are praised, and independent and creative thinking are discouraged. Arts encourage people to learn to think, to act creatively and independently.
What's interesting about Dean Lee, if we look at the theme Frontiers of Reality, is that going back to Vietnam, deciding to settle a space for young artists to offer this platform in a very specific context where contemporary art is still ununderstood. And the fact that he had to be living between different realities, his international career as an artist and his life in Vietnam, dealing with young artists, trying to help them out and to bring in people saying, this is what is happening in the world, but this is also the reality of Vietnam. How, as we people today in this globalized world, can adjust and take the richness of all these cultures of the world and make an advancement for the art in Vietnam.
So I understand that you've looked at Adam Magyar's work recently. Everyone's familiar with it.
Last quarter, so only
Okay,
about a third.
I'm going to show one piece of work here. Again, I'm talking in this part of the talk about imagery because I think that you probably identify the making of images with art making. And I'm wanting to show you some aberrant kinds of image making that cross boundaries in different ways and ask questions about their subject matter and about the practices. So Magyar is a person who has developed a very particular sort of hybrid image practice, which we'll talk about in a minute. So what is this? What? Yeah, it's a train station. But what is the imagery? What are you looking at? Is it slow motion? Okay. So it's shot with a very, very high-speed camera, clearly, right? Because it's catching the flickering of the fluorescent tubes, which is something that's happening too fast for the human eye to see. I don't know whether you noticed that. Catching all kinds of electronic flickers that we can't see. See the display in the background there changing rapidly, refreshing, and the pulsation of the fluorescent tubes there. So one of the things I think is interesting about this work is that it's not photography and it's not video. Right? And in a sense, it's telling us that those two distinctions don't exist anymore. This is a kind of practice that puts itself in the middle of those two realms and says, well, no, you know, no, it's not video. Video was pretending to be film. It's not photography. Digital photography and digital video are a new thing, which are not photography, they're not video. And they have a new range of formal possibilities. And that's one of the important things for you to understand if you're practitioners, is that every new emerging technology provides the opportunity for new sorts of formal exploration if you're smart enough to deconstruct the technology. Right? So you can't do this unless you really think about what's happening on that CCD image plane when the light passes through the lens and activates those pixel elements. What happens, at what speed do they refresh? At what speed does the computer poll those pixels? How is an image assembled? Is it assembled instantaneously, or is it assembled over a specific period of time? And what's that period of time in relation to the kind of time that we inhabit? Right? These are all the kind of techno-formal inquiries that an inquiring mind might engage in order to come up with a formal process which is arresting, right, as this one is. Now I'm going to switch to some other genres of work. This is a Finnish performance artist. It's a piece of work she did outside of Disneyland in Paris. This is just a short excerpt.
It's about to mix the real character.
Okay, that's a key line. Read that line twice.
Yeah, writing, yeah, right, like film, you know, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we will let the subcontractor with this kind of tools. Yeah. We will have to change and to put something else.
So there's another character. There's a Snow White dressed like this.
Yeah.
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 And but
It's
if
not
I,
like a Snow White.
yeah, yeah, I am. It's a
That's
Disneyland,
the
right?
problem for us.
Really?
Yeah, because you don't know what you are going to do.
Yeah.
Maybe you can do bad things. We don't do.
Yeah.
People can make put the dress
Yeah.
and do wrong things,
Yeah.
and that's good for the real character, But
So but I thought many people are dressed up.
yeah, but maybe for child it's better.
Yeah.
But you are the king, so that's strange.
Yeah.
Contrôle encore.
No, I don't know what he was. They're telling me I shouldn't enter dressed up as Snow White.
Par rapport aux enfants qui vont la confondre avec le vrai personnage de la
Oh, okay. You can enter the box. You cannot enter the box as if the children will think that you are Snow White.
So
You have to.
I'm too much like there's the real Snow White and then I'm one character. Yeah.
To make sense to.
My daughter's not Snow White.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why. Only.
For the moment, we are waiting for the responsible.
Yeah.
To study.
Yeah.
And to
Yeah. Yeah, that was nice. Yeah, I didn't think of this.
So, what's going on? Well, they didn't let her in. That's obvious. She probably expected that.
I think there's like a controversy between the real Snow White and the Snow White that you usually see in a cartoon. And like the makes a confusion between the cartoon and real world.
Very nice. Anyone want to elaborate on that? Yes.
I think, well, the problem is that she's not like the patented Snow White, right? I think they just handle it poorly by saying she's not the real Snow White, when really she's not the one that's a part of the brand.
Right.
So they just didn't
Right.
know how to deal with it
Yes.
in a professional way.
Yes.
Well, the thing is, at the parks, the characters that you see there, they're meant to be the real characters because, you know, these children are coming here and they want to meet the Mickey Mouse, so they're treating them to the Mickey Mouse. But, like, they can't have her being that because she doesn't, like, know the characteristics and, like, stuff like that.
Yes.
And I work at Disneyland, so I know that they never have more than the one character in the actual park. There's only one backstage. But then you see like Minnie Mouse here, and you go over to like another area, you see it. The kids, they're not gonna believe it because it's just touted.
Right. So the kids are not going to believe it. That's great. So she's not allowed into the park because her effect in the park will be to disrupt the tissue of fictions which the Disney Corporation needs to keep inflated and alive. And it's about ownership of culture, in a sense, and as you said over there, it's the question of branding. Who owns the concept of Snow White? After all, it's a Grimm Brothers fairy tale which was written in the 1500s. And more generally, who owns any of these artifacts of culture? Right? And what does it mean when a corporation can claim ownership of something that was previously in the public domain? Right? Now, this is cultural politics at a very deep level. Notice that you can see this girl standing outside Disneyland and you can think, well, that's just a dumb prank. Right? No, that's just stupid. But on the other hand, the reason that she is causing disquiet, particularly for the management, is that by that simple act she's destabilizing the fictitious structure which the Disney Corporation works so hard to maintain. That's why you can't manufacture images of Mickey Mouse. I used to live in Florida. I heard a terrible story about a destitute old lady who used to hand knit little woolen Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck dolls and sell them on the side of the road outside of her shack. And the Disney lawyers closed her down.
Well, I think that the guard in this video did have a good point for legal issues. If she were to be associated with something that someone else would use to sue Disneyland, they can't accurately say, well, it's not our fault because the Disney princess is supposed to be the Disney princess. You can't say, oh, this wasn't our Disney princess.
She did a pretty good job, didn't she? So she was impersonating, she was impersonating what, their property. But yes, in a limited sense, you're absolutely right. But of course, if the Disney Corporation is going to wholesale steal the cultural property which is in the public domain and make billions of dollars out of it, then the least they can do is have to take some of the legal burden.
Yeah,
you might say
they're not going to do that. They're just trying to, maintain as much money and power as possible.
Right.
It strikes me that the right argument for the guard to make is that she's on private property and they can kick her off if they want. So this is the easier non-cultural argument to make. I mean, that's because that's really the only. I don't even. It'd be interesting to.
But there's a question actually as to whether Euro Disney is private property.
Right.
It may be leased by the French state.
I've been to Euro Disney, and that part is actually right in between where those tents that are in the background. That's where they check your bags and make sure you're not bringing in any bad stuff. And where she was standing was right in between where you officially enter the park and the tube station. So
Right.
she was right in between. She wasn't actually.
She wasn't probably in the park itself.
But she was close enough that people were being confused.
Yeah, close enough to create a bit of a disturbance. All right, go ahead, Wadner.
Don't the French have different freedom of speech laws or rights?
I'm sure they do, but I don't know what they are. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to another piece of work. It's a piece of work by a British artist by the name of Graham Harwood. Once again, there's a short video that's got some interview footage in it and some of the project itself. So we'll take a look at this.
Shoveling coal from the face to the furnace, smoke spews, spitting blood, stoking boilers, steam under pressure, venting turbines, current becomes power. Coal production. China, 2,380 million tonnes. 6,000 known miners dead, 70,000 new cases of lung disease a year. USA, 1,053 million tonnes. 28 known miners dead, 30,000 new cases of lung disease a year. India, 492.95 million tonnes. Unknown miners dead, unknown cases of lung disease. Computers jolt into life, crash and reboot. Volts flickering, flowing through the logic gates of promise, lung disease. Pneumoconiosis, white finger. Coal dust everywhere. Open wounds of the past, present. Compressed into our white goods. Trapped into the soot of our chimneys, fired into our processors. Infected computers speak of compensation. Minus total claims, 592,000. Live, 241,000. Deceased, 351,000. Claims settled, 581,000. Administration costs, 2.3 billion, including 1.3 billion for claimants' legal fees. Miners' average claim, 3,000. Coal dust blows east to China
and south to India, setting the earth on fire with its blackness. Children grovel over slag, trading food for pneumoconiosis. 500,000 people die each year of coal-related lung disease, with many of those remaining invisible to the database machines they fuel, caught up in the routine atrocity of producing their computers and powering them. Each computer takes over 250 kilograms of fossil fuel to produce. Our way of life consumes bodies, lungs turn black, bones malform to feed the machines, muscles ripped and veins bludgeoned as we progress and develop towards a destination that never comes. We need the nameless poor to die for us, moving on from slave labour to factories to deregulated enterprises. Slaves were branded, recorded, numbered, classified and priced. Today, most Chinese and Indian mine workers never enter into our ledgers and databases. Their underground and invisible labour is the lifeblood of a free market economy, where nameless bodies are no more value than the coal dust that enters their lungs. Stoke the boiler.
The steam engine emerges first from the mine. Then it starts to make rails for itself. Then those rails turn into telegraphs. Then those telegraphs turn into telephones. All the substances in those media have all been dug out of mines. A 100-year-old, 35-ton Showman's steam engine powers a computer with 1.5 tons of coal. Black lungs inflate every time a database record of a miner's lung disease is shown on the computer's monitors. It feels like you've been invited into a fun fair, but one where the rides log their own accidents. A fun fair run by people who long ago became indistinct from the machines they maintain. Over 3 days at the Discovery Museum with groups of miner activists, Coal-Fired Computers articulates relations between power, art and media.
I think it's interesting the fact that we had the computers down in the Discovery Museum powered by the big traction engine outside, which was coal-fired, of course, so the computers themselves were coal-fired. And the teenagers who come in who have been on the computers were asking what was the relevance of the big machine outside with the belch and the smoke. And when we said, you know, it powers the computers, you could see the non-comprehension. Like, how can that thing, with the coal, like, make this work?
What do the computers? Batteries.
So here's a great example of connecting the dots, making that which is rendered invisible in our culture visible, and the implications of it very present, right? We flick the lights on, we run our computers, we don't think about the power that's consumed, the environmental effects of the usage of that power, or the disease and human suffering which goes into the production of the computers and the power which powers them. Here, Harwood has brought together those things in a very persuasive way, right? Here's a black smoke belching steam engine generating power to run some computers. Kids sit down, they play video games, and then they realize that they start to put two and two together, right? That the energy doesn't come from nowhere. The rare earths and the plastics don't just somehow materialize. For every one of those laptops, there's hectares of industrial waste in China. So this is an interesting case of a kind of political, social, and environmental activism I mean, very carefully located in a science museum. Right? Not in an art gallery.
Our global fossil fuel reliance, and especially on how coal transforms our health as we have transformed it. Today, coal produces 42% of the world's electricity. In many countries, this rate is much higher, more than 70% in India and China. According to the World Health Organization, 318,000 deaths occur annually from chronic bronchitis and emphysema caused by exposure to coal dust. The common perception is that wealthy countries have put all this behind them, displacing coal dust into the lungs of unrecorded, unknown miners in distant lands, coal returning into our lives in the form of cheap and apparently clean goods we consume. Coal-fired computers brings together these disparate elements into an artwork, allowing us to reflect on the complexities that have created and maintained power, the crisis of fueling that power, and its subsequent health residues.
For me, trying to connect the steam engine from 100 years ago, or 200 years ago, to a computer now, kind of had a huge symbolic resonance to it.
Politics is cool. Coal is politics, particularly on this island, and it's hard to understand anything of the history of the development of industrialism and imperialism and politics and the political views without an understanding of coal. That's why anybody who sets off with the idea of understanding the 80-45 miners' strike and thinks it's just about job losses is severely missing the point. I mean.
Okay, we'll stop that for the moment because I know I've got other things I want to show you. But I think we've made the point. So moving on, let's see. Got 5-10 minutes? 5-ish? All right. Okay. So, thought we'd have a look at this little presentation, once again occurring in the context of a science gallery. This is an interesting new cultural development which has been growing around the world for a decade or two now. Is the idea of involving artists in communication of science through storefront sorts of science galleries. And this one is in Trinity College, Dublin. And this is a project I thought we'd have a look at called Self-Made.
My name is Sister Paula. I'm a smell researcher. I make smells. I try to assimilate smells from reality through chemical components.
My name is Christina Gopakis. I'm a synthetic biologist and a microbiologist. I'm really interested in symbiosis and how organisms work together in really interesting communities in the soil, on our bodies, and in cheese.
We were primarily interested in each other's methodology of working rather than the products as an outcome of it. And by investigating into that specifically, we came up with this project. The project Self-Made is about the body and its microorganism and bacteria. We all know that cheese and body smells are very much associated. Yeah, you say you have a cheesy feet, for example.
The bacteria is actually very similar. The bacteria that you find in between the toes is actually very similar to the bacteria that makes cheese smell like toes. So that intersection really of the smell and the bacteria and how we as humans interact with bacteria, whether as part of our own bodies or in this kind of relationship that makes this beautiful product of cheese, that was really interesting to us. And so that's why we wanted to make our own cheese using bacteria that we collected from the human body to show that connection directly.
We live in a world which is sterilized, sanitized, homogenized for your kind of protection. By doing that, we are removing a lot of important information in the case of smell and also purposes. Bacteria are there for a purpose. Not all of them are maybe healthy, but maybe in the end of the day we remove too many also healthy ones.
I like to say that this is cheese not for eating, but for thinking about all of these connections.
Absolutely.
For us, the idea behind the portraits was a way to highlight the sort of individuality of the microbiome of each person and that connection, that very personal connection to odor and smell and bacteria. I wanted bacteria from the mouth and from between the toes. That's where you get a lot of diversity and a lot of cheese-specific organisms. Any place on the body that's quite moist and any creases and where you can hold bacteria, that's where we want to get. That's where you get the most diversity.
Joe, you caught that, right? These were cheeses made with bacteria collected from human bodies. Right? So that's kind of provocative and it's kind of icky. Right? But it's interesting to note that the bacteria that go into making cheese are very, very similar to the bacteria that lives on our bodies. This is all part of a generally increasing awareness of what's called the human microbiome. Does that phrase mean anything to any of you? So for the last 100 years, we've been working very hard to kill bacteria. The antibiotics are huge in agriculture and in food production and in medicine, Western medicine. There's beginning to be a reaction to that because it's been recognized that there are more single-celled organisms living in your body than you have cells. We're not a single creature occasionally inhabited by germs. We live symbiotically with a world, an ecosystem which lives inside us, which we could not live without. We live symbiotically with these organisms. They help us digest our food. They do all kinds of interesting things for us. They metabolize chemicals that we can't metabolize. They build the components for vitamins and this and that we don't have the physiological capability to create with our own biology. So this is, I guess, a project which seeks to talk about that once again, rather like the coal-fired computer project, by juxtaposing these seemingly antagonistic or opposed elements. And that's one of the things I would say that goes into the making of an effective artwork. Simplistically, it's called shock value, right? But what shocks you? What shocks you is the juxtaposition of two things which you always thought were separate, which you suddenly find are closely related, and then you have to figure out why. And in figuring out why, you have to reconfigure your entire worldview. Right? When it works best, that's one of the things that art can do. Shall I stop there?
Just for questions, yeah.
Yeah, all right. Okay, so there were other things I wanted to show you, but I think that's been a good conversation, so let's stop and talk.
Thanks, Sam. One of the things at the end that, particularly in the coal-fired computers, you guys love it when I bring up Heidegger, so I'm going to do it again. That's a joke. The idea that the humans themselves in the technological modern world become fuel for the machine is very much embedded in that project, that we need people to mine the coal, and that those people are kind of ignored in the process. And that remains true. It's a very interesting point. I mean, I hadn't thought of it, that we still generate coal as the original kind of industrial source of power, and we still use it to generate so much power. It's great. We only have a few minutes for questions. So Simon's group, if you guys want to query Simon on some things. Yes, sir.
So going back to the Heidegger question, why do you think that art is indispensable for perpetual training as opposed to privileged diet from the lead? Because given what you just showed us, I would say that's a better argument for providing that people are just using this as a way to benefit themselves.
Really?
I would.
How so? Sorry, I just don't understand the question. That these projects show us that.
Well, I think that, for example, like the Disney, the Snow White one, right? Since like there was a conflict because it didn't fit the Disney worldview, which you explained is that since it's breaking that fictional world, it's not generating them money. It's taking away from that. And they don't want that, so they try and cut it off. And I'm pretty sure like they did the research themselves too to figure out how to do that. How to manipulate people to do.
Right. But I think the point of that iClicker question was that there, in conventional art circles, there's this notion that art is about self-expression, and that the function of art is to produce commodities for the wealthy. Right. This is the model of art we see in the commercial art galleries. Right. And I think the point that I've been trying to make is that there are realms of practice which sometimes inhabit those institutions and sometimes don't, but have absolutely no interest in self-expression or the production of commodities for an art market. I mean, it may be that those cheeses that are made from sweat and tears might become collectible in some weird museum one day, but that wasn't the point of the exercise. The exercise was an exercise in kind of critical examination and exposure of issues. Likewise with the coal-powered computer project. There's no doubt about the fact that Graham Harwood and his associates had no concern for doing that work in order that they become famous artists. Right? They had an issue they wanted to talk about. And that issue was something that is hidden and erased from our consciousness, and that is the closed loop of power generation and power consumption. And in particular, in his case, the cost of coal.
I should, just for the sake of, since I put Simon on the spot with that actual question, the point of the question was not that we needed to decide one way or the other. And I know that's not the point of your question. You're wanting to be provocative as well. I think it's just, maybe the thing you should take away from that is to highlight that there are these poles, there is this polarity in the art world between making work to sell, in a variety of ways, and that there's nothing wrong with that. We're also not passing judgment on that. Artists need to, Simon is, I'm not. So I think that, there's a group of artists that choose to make their living that way. There's also a variety of ways to make a living. We should also point that out. Right. Complicate that. And then at the other end of the pole, there's artists who either want to make a point or want to explore an idea, and probably most interestingly when they're doing both at the same time. We can't always assume we can make, I think the coal-fired computer makes a point, deliberately. I think the cheese asks a question. What does it mean to make cheese with our feet? Can we even eat it? I mean, that's my question. Probably delicious. Anyways, I just wanted to not make Simon have to answer the world's hardest question, which is what the point.
Well, it is. I mean, it's a really fundamental question, and underneath that question, I understood why Jesse asked it. Is that it's interrogating your assumptions about what art is for. Right? And if you haven't got to the point of actually asking yourself that, then it's about time you did.
Let's try and sneak in one about one. Don't put your bags.
There was a question up there. Did you want to ask a question?
Let's just make sure that the group has asked their questions.
Oh, okay.
Not to cut off the other questions.
On the course website, there are pictures of like robots and stuff. So
Yes.
I was wondering if you can briefly explain your work
Let's say for about 25 years, I was building custom interactive robotic kinds of sculptures and installations. There's pretty complete documentation on my website, simonpenny.net. There's videos and text about all of the pieces. It would be another long talk to go into that in any more detail.